Okay, in the US, the women's national soccer team have lost in their case for equal pay with men. This has been dragging on for quite some time. Now, their male counterparts have actually supported them in this, so this is actually creating more problems than solutions down the line with a mistrust between the players and their federation. Now, their other case for travel, medical care, and other expenses is still ongoing, and I honestly believe that they will be successful in that class lawsuit. However, they were asking for $66 million in damages, which is roughly about £55 million in damages, to be paid out to them, to 28 players. And while Equal Pay Act is enshrined in US law, and it's actually enshrined in law across the Western world, the economics of women's football, soccer, wherever you are in the world, speak for themselves. The women's game, at international level at least, yes, the crowds are good. International level, international tournaments, as we've seen in tournaments, they are quite good for the stadiums used. And the last World Cup, the crowds were very, very good. Women's Euros, the crowds have been good in recent years, and at the Olympics as well. Yes, I do agree that on an international standpoint, the crowds are pretty healthy. It's the club game where it falls apart, and the club game is where the money's really made in football or soccer. And the MLS, the men's game, has enough problems in the US with teams folding in its history, and their only solution to their problems is expansion, really aggressive expansion. Now, the women's game at youth level and at universities in the US and Canada is healthy. They have a very, very healthy player pool to choose from. Pretty competitive university leagues, absolutely. But when we talk about professional clubs, that's where it falls apart badly. And what they're asking would bankrupt the women's game. I do understand why they're asking for equal pay, but yes, their demands for equal pay would catastrophically destroy the women's game financially. Now, the male players who play in the MLS and for the national side and for clubs around the world are fully in support of their female counterparts, and this is where the breakdown between the federation and the players is going to be a long-lasting one. Back in February, the male players came out in support of their more successful female counterparts when it comes to international level. The women have got 5 Olympic golds, 4 World Cups, and that speaks for itself. They are a very, very successful, nation when it comes to international football. But club level is where it is a complete and utter disaster. There's a whole host of reasons why it's got financial problems at club level, and that's where the money's made. And if they are to basically demand these equal wages, the clubs will fold. We've seen it in other women's sports. The only female league professionally in North America that seems to be supported by the male counterparts is the women's NBA. And the problem with that is, how many female basketball players can you name? It's not due to a lack of talent or a lack of effort. It's a lack of being marketed correctly and sold correctly to the TV companies, the media companies, the sponsors. The lack of exposure, plain and simple. That is part of the problem. The lack of media exposure for the sport globally, because there's a lot of money globally in football, and we've seen new money from the Far East and the Middle East being pumped into the sport. Now, that raises other issues as well. But it's going to be interesting. They are going to appeal. Several high-profile players, including Rapinoe and others, have really kicked off over recent years. But this ruling, I don't think, is final. I think there will be an appeals process. They also got this, as I say, this second class action lawsuit against the federation. And if they are successful, this is going to be quite a financial burden and hit on US soccer. At this current time, we know that anywhere between 12 and 20 billion US dollars has been wiped off sport in the US alone. We're not even talking about Canada, where there's also women's football. Just imagine that 12 to 20 billion US dollars in the last 6 weeks has been wiped off the value of professional sport and semi-professional sport in the US. And the longer this lockdown continues, the more money is going to be lost. So while I completely agree with the players, wanting to, highlight the fact that there's a thing called the Equal Pay Act, and they should get paid more. The economics before the crisis weren't looking great for the women's game at club level. And the economics now, I mean, we're seeing teams go out of business around the world. We're seeing leagues possibly face the threat of extinction. If the leagues go bust, then you're not going to get paid because there's no league to play for. So we are in very uncertain times, but expect there to be an appeals process, and this legal battle could go on for a really long time. All you have to look is look at women's ice hockey in the US and Canada. The most elite women's players have basically gone on strike over their pay and conditions. The women's NBA barely makes any money, if at all. Most of the teams operate at a loss and are basically propped up by the NBA and the Basketball Association pumps money into it to keep it afloat. So yes, there are ways that they could improve their financial situation long term, and it's to do with marketing. It's to do with getting a bigger media presence and a healthy TV deal and good time slots for games and improving the accessibility for crowds to go and actually increase crowd numbers at league level, because at international level, yeah, crowds are fine. It's at the domestic leagues around the world that the numbers aren't there, and that's where football makes its money, soccer makes its money, should I say, for the North American audience. It's where it makes its money. And I've watched women's football for quite a few years, and when you see domestic cup and league games, there are not great crowds, and it is a shame because it is good fun to watch. There's less histrionics, there's less diving, there's less rolling around and etc. But it yeah, we're at a very interesting crossroads in the women's game. But we'll see what happens, and we'll see how long this legal process lasts. I mean, this has been argued for a long time in the women's game, but professional leagues in the US and Canada have regularly collapsed and folded due to lack of funds. So money in the women's game at club level is also a problem, and it has been for 20 years. So we'll have to see how this plays out and how, if they do end up being successful in their legal action, and how the federation respond to the fact that there is an appeal and the fact that the players on the men's side of the game are actually coming out in support, almost as a block, in support of their female counterparts, and we could see a breakdown in relations between the players and the union. And that's something we see a lot in North American sports, is player strikes and lockouts, and that's something that the sport, I don't think, can afford long term if it is to be viable. But there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts below, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.